Imagine a time when all of humanity spoke with one voice, when every man, woman, and child shared the same tongue. No barriers. No divisions. One people, united in purpose. It sounds like paradise, doesn't it? But unity without humility can be the most dangerous weapon of all. In the fertile plain of Shinar, men dreamed not of worshipping God but of rivaling him. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly, let us build ourselves a city, with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth." This was no ordinary construction. This was defiance molded in clay and baked in fire. The tower was not built to honor heaven, but to invade it. Humanity, drunk on its own power, believed it could rise high enough to stand as equals with God. But pride always blinds. What they thought was progress was actually rebellion. What they believed was strength was actually arrogance. And just when their tower touched the clouds, heaven came down, not with stones or fire, but with something far more devastating: confusion. This is the story of ambition without limits. Of unity without humility. Of men who thought they could storm the gates of heaven and found themselves broken by the very words they spoke. Stay with us, because the Tower of Babel is not just an ancient story, it's a warning for every age, even ours. And by the end of this video, you'll see why this moment changed the entire course of human history. But before we climb any higher, make sure to subscribe, because these timeless stories are only just beginning. In the earliest days after the Great Flood, humanity was small in number but mighty in spirit. Descendants of Noah multiplied and spread, but unlike the fractured world we know today, there were no barriers of speech, no walls of misunderstanding. Every man, woman, and child spoke the same language. Think about that. A world where no translation was needed. Where ideas flowed as easily as breath. Where vision and purpose could spread from heart to heart without confusion. With one tongue and one culture, they were not just united, they were unstoppable. But unity is a double-edged sword. In the hands of the humble, it becomes a tool for worship. In the hands of the proud, it becomes a weapon against heaven itself. As they journeyed eastward, the people settled in a broad plain known as Shinar. It was fertile, open, and full of promise. There, in their unity, they began to dream, not of honoring God, but of exalting themselves. The same unity that could have built altars to the Creator now whispered of towers to rival him. At first glance, their ambition looked noble. A city where all could gather. A monument to human achievement. A tower that would pierce the heavens. They longed for permanence, for greatness, for a name that would echo through generations. "Let us build," they cried, "so that we may not be scattered across the earth." But beneath the unity lay rebellion. God had commanded humanity to fill the earth, to spread across its mountains and valleys, to multiply and subdue it. Yet here they were, resisting that command, clinging together in defiance. What looked like progress was actually pride. What looked like unity was rebellion wrapped in bricks and mortar. This is the paradox of humanity. The same gift that binds us together can also blind us to our dependence on God. When people speak with one voice, their power grows. But without humility, that power turns inward, upward, against the very one who gave it. The Tower of Babel was not just about architecture, it was about identity. It was about humanity saying, "We will not be scattered. We will not bow. We will rise." But no matter how high man climbs, he cannot erase the truth: unity without God is emptiness. Strength without submission is weakness. And ambition without obedience is ruin. For in Shinar, the people were united, but they were united against their Creator. And unity against God is nothing but rebellion dressed as progress. The people of Shinar were not content with survival. They wanted glory. They wanted a monument that would defy time and declare to all creation, "We are great." It began with an idea, whispered among workers, then shouted among leaders: "Come, let us build a city, with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the earth." Notice their words. They did not say, "Let us honor God." They did not say, "Let us build for His glory." They said, "Let us make a name for ourselves." Here lies the true vision of Babel, not architecture, but arrogance. Not bricks, but pride. The tower was more than a structure, it was a declaration of independence from God. They discovered a new technology, fired brick and tar for mortar. Stronger than stone, more durable than clay. Innovation fed ambition, and ambition fueled rebellion. With every brick, they were not just building upward, they were building away from God. The tower symbolized two dangerous desires. They believed they could climb into the realm of the divine, not through worship or faith, but through human effort. It was man's attempt to seize heaven by his own strength. God had told mankind to spread across the earth. But they resisted. They feared being scattered, so they clung together, seeking safety in their own empire instead of trusting God's design. From the ground, the tower rose like a mountain of defiance. Workers toiled day and night, shouting commands in one tongue, their voices unified in rebellion. Dust filled the air, scaffolds groaned, and the vision grew higher and higher. To them, it was progress. To heaven, it was pride. But here is the irony, they thought their tower could pierce the skies, yet from heaven's perspective, it was still small. No matter how high man builds, it remains dust compared to the throne of God. The vision of the tower reveals a truth about the human heart. When we remove God from our plans, even our greatest achievements become monuments to emptiness. Skyscrapers without surrender. Empires without obedience. Unity without humility. Babel was not the last tower humanity tried to build. Every generation has its own version, empires of pride, cities of arrogance, kingdoms of self. They may not be made of brick and tar, but the spirit is the same. We will rise. We will rule. We will not bow. But towers built on pride always fall. And soon, the God of heaven would descend, not with stone or fire, but with a weapon far more devastating, the power to confuse the very words they spoke. While the tower climbed higher and higher, and men shouted their pride into the sky, heaven watched. They thought their bricks would touch eternity, but their work was nothing more than clay against the vastness of the heavens. Yet it was not the size of the tower that moved God, it was the arrogance behind it. The people were united, speaking one language, chasing one ambition. And in their unity, they no longer sought their Creator. They no longer remembered His command to fill the earth. They no longer looked up in worship, they looked up in rivalry. What they built was not a city for living, but a throne for their pride. So the Lord descended. The irony is striking, man's tower was meant to reach the heavens, yet God still had to come down to see it. What was to them a monument of greatness was, to Him, a small dot on the earth. But He knew the danger. If left unchecked, their unity in rebellion would lead to corruption far greater than the flood had ever washed away. If they could accomplish this together in arrogance, there would be no end to the rebellion they would imagine. And so, judgment was decreed, not by fire, not by sword, not by storm, but by something invisible and unstoppable, confusion. God touched their tongues, and in an instant, the unity of humanity shattered. One worker called for a brick, but another heard only strange sounds. One leader gave orders, but his men no longer understood him. Frustration turned to anger, anger to chaos, chaos to silence. The tower that was meant to pierce the skies now echoed with noise and misunderstanding. Work halted. The scaffolds creaked in abandonment. The pride of man crumbled, not in stone, but in speech. Their voices, once one, were now many. The gift of a shared tongue was replaced with 1,000 sounds that scattered like the wind. What mankind had tried to achieve by rising upward, God ended by breaking their words. And in that confusion, the people discovered their limits. They could not finish their tower. They could not cling together. They could not make themselves gods. The descent of God upon Babel was not just judgment, it was mercy. For had their rebellion continued, mankind would have destroyed itself in its arrogance. God scattered them before they could scatter their souls completely. He humbled them not to ruin them, but to preserve them. And so, the tower stood unfinished, a broken monument of human pride. The great dream of heaven without God ended in Babel, and from that day forward, the earth was filled with nations and languages. The unity of arrogance was gone, but the will of God remained. The plain of Shinar once rang with the sound of hammers striking, bricks stacking, and voices shouting in perfect rhythm. But after God descended, the harmony was broken. Workers stood on the scaffolds, calling for clay, but their cries were answered with strange sounds they could not comprehend. Leaders barked orders, but their men looked back in confusion, unable to understand a single word. The unity that had built the foundation of the tower cracked in an instant. Arguments broke out where once there had been agreement. Neighbors who had shared dreams now glared at each other as if strangers. The same tongues that once united them became walls of division. What was once a city of one heart and one language turned into a battlefield of voices, each speaking words the others could not grasp. The tower itself still stood, a giant skeleton of ambition, stretching into the sky but lifeless. Without communication, construction halted. Bricks lay scattered in the dust, mortar hardened in the sun, tools abandoned mid-work. Some climbed down from the scaffolds in anger, others stormed away in frustration, and many simply stood in stunned silence, realizing their dream was finished. The fall of the tower was not a collapse of stone, it was a collapse of purpose. The pride that had once fueled their work drained away as quickly as their understanding of one another. They could no longer cooperate. They could no longer build. They could no longer dream as one. The city that was meant to be a monument to their greatness was now a graveyard of ambition. The people began to scatter, some out of necessity, others out of shame. Families and tribes grouped together by the languages they understood, forming small bands that drifted away from Shinar in search of new lands. The great unity they had clung to was shattered forever. What they had feared, being scattered across the earth, was exactly what became their destiny. From a distance, the unfinished tower stood as a silent witness to their folly. Its lower levels might have remained for generations, a reminder carved into the earth of how pride can rise quickly but crumble without warning. It was not toppled by wind or flood, but by the hand of God who broke the arrogance of man with a single act of confusion. And so the Tower of Babel fell, not in the way they feared, with fire raining from the skies or stones crushed into dust, but in a deeper, more permanent way. It fell in the hearts of men. Their confidence was destroyed. Their unity was dissolved. Their ambition was silenced. The monument that was supposed to reach heaven became a symbol of how far man could fall without God. And from that day, the memory of Babel became a warning etched in history. Towers built on pride do not stand, and unity without humility is nothing but a path to ruin. When the voices of men shattered into 1,000 tongues, the plain of Shinar could no longer hold them. Families huddled together, clinging to those whose words they could still understand. Brothers turned from brothers, friends became strangers, and neighbors who had once worked hand in hand now stared at one another with blank confusion. The dream of one city, one tower, one name was broken forever. Slowly, the scattering began. Some went north toward the mountains, others east toward the deserts, still others followed rivers south into fertile valleys. Each group carried with them the memory of Babel, though their tongues told the story in different sounds. They no longer shared one language, but they all carried the same mark of pride humbled by heaven. What humanity had resisted, being scattered across the earth, was exactly what God's hand accomplished. Yet within that scattering was not only judgment, but mercy. For in their separation, they were forced to depend once more on Him. Diversity became their destiny, and nations were born from the fragments of a broken city. The world grew larger overnight. Where once there had been one culture, now there were many. Where once there had been one language, now there were countless. From the confusion of tongues came the birth of tribes, kingdoms, and civilizations. The same event that ended a tower gave rise to history as we know it. It is a paradox too striking to ignore. Humanity's pride had sought to make a single name for itself, but God scattered them into many names. They sought to climb into heaven, but instead they were driven across the earth. Their arrogance built walls between them, but God turned those walls into boundaries that would shape nations, cultures, and traditions. Out of rebellion, beauty was born. Out of judgment came diversity. Even as they spread, the memory of Babel haunted them. The unfinished tower stood in Shinar, perhaps for generations, a silent monument of failure. Children must have asked their parents, "Why did we leave? Why did we stop building?" And every answer, though told in a different language, carried the same lesson: because we tried to rise without God, and we were brought low. The scattering at Babel was not just the end of a tower, it was the beginning of the human story in all its variety. From it came the languages that fill our ears today, the cultures that paint the world with color, the nations that fill the earth. What man meant for pride, God transformed into a greater plan, reminding all generations that no matter how strong or united humanity may become, without him, it crumbles. And so the people left Shinar, walking away from the ruins of their ambition, each group carrying a new tongue, a new path, a new destiny. The tower they had hoped would bind them together became the reason they were scattered forever. And through their scattering, God's purpose prevailed. The Tower of Babel is more than an ancient ruin. It is a mirror. A warning carved into the memory of humanity. It tells us that pride builds monuments, but only humility builds legacies. It shows us that when man unites against God, his words turn to dust, his works collapse, and his dreams scatter to the wind. Look around today. We are still building towers. Skyscrapers of ambition, empires of wealth, kingdoms of self. Yet Babel whispers to us across the centuries, without God, all of this will fall. The scattering of nations was not just judgment, it was mercy. God shattered their pride so that humanity could survive its own arrogance. Out of confusion came culture. Out of division came diversity. Out of judgment came the reminder that we were never meant to rise without him. And that is why this story still matters. Because it speaks not only of what once was, but of what always will be. Towers fall, but God remains. Languages divide, but his truth endures. Man scatters, but his purpose prevails. So let the unfinished tower stand in our minds as a lesson: greatness without God is nothing, but with him, even the smallest life can echo into eternity. Journey into the Tower of Babel gripped you, don't let it end here. Subscribe now, and join us as we uncover more stories of faith, rebellion, and redemption. Stories that shaped the world, and still shape us today.